please mute or shut off your cell phone so we don't have any extraneous ringing noises during the course of the presentation by our guest today. At the question and answer session, please remember that question and answer is open to members of the working press and press club members only. And we ask that if you have a question for the guest, you please raise your hand with the schoolhouse rules. Raise your hand, wait to be recognized. And if you don't mind, please ask your question in a tone of voice loud enough for the room to hear. That way the guest won't have to repeat your question. And please keep your question as brief as possible so that we can get more questions in for the guest. Our guest today is U.S. Senator David Vitter. He started his political career with 7 years in the State House of Representatives from 1992 to 1999. He was elected to the U.S. House in Louisiana's District 1 in 1999 to replace resigning Congressman Bob Livingston. Senator Vitter was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2002 to fill a vacancy left by John Breaux. He was successfully re-elected in 2010, and he has in fact, to the best of my knowledge, never lost an election. Is that correct? There you go. Some of his committee assignments in D.C. on the Hill: Armed Services Committee, Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, the Commerce Committee, Environment, Public Works, Small Business and Entrepreneurship. Spends a lot of time trying to do what's best for Louisiana, and he's here to talk about his candidacy for governor of Louisiana, some of the initiatives and statewide series of forums that he's going to talk about today. So I'd like to make you feel very welcome, U.S. Senator David Vitter.
Thank you, Kevin, and good afternoon. It's great to be here. Thanks to all of you for the invitation. Now, speaking at the press club here seems to be a little bit of a different experience for me than for some of my peers. Some friends came to listen to my colleague, Mary Landry, when she was before you recently, and they reported back that it was a lot like a church revival with many amens and thunderous applause lines. At one point, I think when Mary was hitting her crescendo, half of the Advocate's editorial board fainted from excitement. It's quite a spectacle. But rest assured, like with most press reports, I took it all with a grain of salt. And if any press club members faint before our Q&A, I'm sure I'll be the one who's most excited, so we'll go from there. On a serious note, I reflect sadly that there is an empty chair here today, and I want to join all of you in remembering and paying our respects to the late John McGinnis. He was one of a kind and certainly will be missed in Louisiana political and media circles. He is irreplaceable, no offense to Jeremy Eldridge. It was 5 months ago that I announced that I would run to become our next governor of Louisiana. So I thought now would be a great time to give an update on what I promised would be my careful preparation for the job. When I announced my intentions back in January, I chose my words very deliberately. I said exactly what I was thinking, and I meant exactly what I said. So I thought I would update you today on the key themes that I laid out then. I said that my decision to run for governor would in no way limit the critical work I'm doing in the U.S. Senate, and it hasn't. In fact, my work this year has been among the most productive during my tenure in the Senate. Just last week, I was at the White House for the bill signing ceremony for the WRDA bill, the Water Resources Development Act, which is important for the nation, but really critical for Louisiana, given that it has major legislative accomplishments in the areas of hurricane and flood protection, coastal restoration, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers reform, and maritime commerce, dredging, and other important work to keep our ports and our maritime industries humming. Immediately after we finished work on the WRDA bill in the committee that I serve on, we started work on the next highway bill. And just a few weeks ago, we passed out our portion of the highway bill out of committee on a strong bipartisan basis, in fact, on a unanimous basis. And I continue to work with others on that bill, trying to put together a financing piece and move forward with our federal highway program. I've joined with many others and led many others, Republicans and Democrats, on a new chemical safety and regulatory reform bill That's something I've been working on for quite a while, and I struck an important compromise with the late Senator Frank Lautenberg. Tragically, he died soon after we reached that compromise, but I've continued that bipartisan work with Tom Udall and several others, and we're moving forward with that bill in the Senate. Veterans issues have obviously been at the forefront of the news, and I've been very involved in those, going back to before this VA scandal broke, working in particular on getting our new clinics in Lafayette and Lake Charles built. We finally scored a breakthrough on that, and also working on a bipartisan veteran backlog working group where we're making important progress. Flood insurance, key critical challenge for the state, and I'm very happy to report that we largely solved that problem with an important flood insurance bill that will avoid completely unaffordable rate increases in South Louisiana and elsewhere, so that was a big victory. And then I'm continuing to work on various reform efforts, including the no Washington exemption from Obamacare bill, to try to make sure that Washington, Congress, the Obama administration is treated like all other Americans under Obamacare when they go to the exchanges. So, obvious question, why did I decide to leave this important work to run for governor? Well, it's pretty simple. Wendy and I concluded that I can have a much bigger impact as our next governor, addressing the unique challenges and opportunities we face as a state. First, by definition, a chief executive can make a huge positive impact, just like a company's CEO can make the necessary decisions to build and grow a business. Second, I truly think we're at a really special moment in Louisiana with challenges and opportunities that are particularly exciting. We're well on the way to making common sense conservative reform the rule in Louisiana versus the occasional 4-year exception. And we're beginning a real renaissance in American energy activity, a new era in which Louisiana can be an economic leader. Third and finally, even working the minority party in the Senate, I feel as though I've accomplished a lot there. To go well beyond that would require Washington to cure its dysfunction much more than it would require me to do anything very new or different. So I want to build on our positive, concrete wins in the U.S. Senate. I want to help lead and build a model of conservative reform governance that works for all citizens here in Louisiana. I have to say all of those thoughts have only been affirmed 100-fold since January. Wendy and I have been really humbled and overwhelmed, quite frankly, by the encouragement and support we've received all around the state. And because of that support, we've blown past all of our initial goals in the campaign well ahead of schedule in fundraising, in grassroots organizing, in polling, etc. Now in January, I said I would prepare for the governor's job by doing what I've always done, listening to the people of Louisiana, knowing that I sure don't have all the answers. I've continued to hold my official town hall meetings in every parish of the state. We're now up to 358. And I also do telephone town halls when I'm in Washington voting 153 and counting. And with the governor's job in mind, I've also been doing lots of outreach and meetings on state issues. I began this with roundtable discussions on state issues in Monroe, Ruston, and Lafayette the very week I announced. And I've continued that, listening carefully in dozens of settings and in every region of the state. Of course, these will only ramp up over time. While these engagement sessions come in many shapes and sizes and are usually very informal and conversational, I'll be hosting 5 somewhat more structured leadership forums on our future around the state between now and September. And the topics and dates and locations are summarized on the handout at your table. These will be roundtable discussions among Louisiana leaders. I'll kick off each discussion with brief remarks. I'll lead the discussion, certainly asking questions, and as will others, and we'll hold a press availability after each session The higher ed and the infrastructure sessions will also include a discussion of the closely related issue of state budget, spending, and tax reform. Now, I certainly don't want to prejudge these sessions, and I have a lot more homework to do in general. But several big themes have already emerged in my mind as I've thought about the above topics, issues which are interrelated in many ways. In K through 12 education, I think we need to focus additional efforts at both ends of the age and grade spectrum. We must get our children off to a fundamentally stronger, sounder start in the early grades and in basic skills, starting with reading. Right now, only 34% of America's third graders read at or above grade level. That's a disgrace. And the bigger disgrace, in Louisiana, the figure is 23%. We need a focused, committed effort to change that, to have absolutely as many Louisiana third graders as possible reading at or above grade level. This will put them on a fundamentally higher trajectory throughout their school careers. You know, it's difficult to introduce major education reforms and spring it on kids, say in the 8th grade. Having kids truly proficient in basic skills like reading from the beginning will make an enormous difference. And it's essential in order for reforms affecting higher grade levels to succeed. And in high school, at the other end of the age and grade spectrum, we need to prepare kids for any possible productive careers they want, whether it involves college or skills training. For far too long, we've devalued jobs and careers that don't involve a college degree. That's wrong, and it's wrong-headed when we have great high-paying jobs going unfilled because of a lack of a skilled workforce. In the Lake Charles area, where the Wall Street Journal says we're building a cover on the bayou, brand new welders with a technical certificate will soon be making over $60,000 a year, brand new. And with only a few years under their belts, they will approach or exceed $100,000. And we don't have enough trained young people to fill these jobs. That's crazy. And we must correct that by highlighting these tracks and opportunities in high school and by expanding follow-on training opportunities that work, like Baton Rouge Community College's oversubscribed welding program and Associated Builder and Contractors expanding LaRose training campus. In the area of higher education, we need to stabilize the system. We all know we've experienced 6 years of cuts, of uncertainty, of instability. Stabilizing the system can probably best be done by focusing on fundamental budget, spending, and tax reform early on in the next administration. The state budget has been held together in the last few years with sewing yarn and Scotch tape. We need to change that with reforms that promote honesty and transparency, economic growth, and through it, budget stability. That budget spending and tax reform could also incorporate measures that provide much more robust support for our highway program and other vital infrastructure development. This is a crucial backbone of our economy that has been neglected, allowed to deteriorate over several years, leading to our current $12 to $13 billion Louisiana infrastructure backlog. Infrastructure has been a real priority of mine in the Senate as the lead Republican on the Infrastructure Committee, working, as I mentioned, on WRDA, the highway bill, and more. Finally, I'm excited that we have the best business environment for growing good jobs in Louisiana in my lifetime. And it's beginning to pay big dividends, but we need to focus on two challenges. First, we must remain aggressively vigilant and truly committed to rooting out corruption and cronyism. Fortune magazine just rated Louisiana the second most corrupt state in the nation. Now, that doesn't mean that we haven't made important progress. In fact, statistics like corruption convictions actually worsen, go up when you attack the problem aggressively. But it does mean that this is a generation's work, not a year's. And we need to attack a very dark cloud remaining in our business climate, the litigation environment in Louisiana, marked by the regular threat of frivolous and harassing lawsuits. The Institute for Legal Reform currently ranks Louisiana 49th in the nation in this category and considers Orleans Parish one of the most unfair and threatening legal jurisdictions in the country. We need to fix this just as our thriving neighbors in Texas have done. In closing, let me repeat two solemn pledges that I made upon announcing my candidacy for governor back in January. First, if elected governor, this will be my last political job, elected or appointed, period. And second, after listening and learning through the engagements around the state that I've discussed, I will lead. I'm not running for governor as a stepping stone or to boast a nice title and cut ribbons. I'm not even running to gain a cameo appearance on Duck Dynasty, as intensely jealous as I am of that. Now, I'm running for governor to take on the important issues and make the hard decisions, not to avoid them. And my only criteria in doing so will be to do what's best for all Louisianians, from our best and brightest to our most vulnerable. Thank you again for inviting me here today, and I'll be happy to take questions. Look forward to it.
Senator, what do you think are the top 3 issues for Louisiana in Washington, D.C. the next year?
In Washington, D.C., addressing them in my current job as senator, I would say for the country as well as for Louisiana, it's to get a real recovery going. You know, experts say we're out of recession. For many Americans, can't feel that. That's a jobless recovery. It's a very slow recovery, and by historical standards, it's a particularly mediocre recovery. So we need to fundamentally change that. I think that leads to the second challenge, which is directly related to that, pushing back excesses of Washington that I think are the fundamental problem with our economic recovery, including overregulation in areas like EPA. That threatens to put Baton Rouge into non-attainment and really quash some developing economic activity here. Obamacare, healthcare costs and mandates. So I would mention that as the second. And the third, I'm very concerned about our lack of aggressive leadership around the world. I'm very concerned about what's happening to the American military and what that means in terms of leadership around the world.
Senator, you mentioned education. Would you like to give a comment on the state's adoption of the Common Core standards?
Well, obviously, that's something I'm looking at very carefully, and it's obviously something we're going to be talking about in this K through 12 leadership forum on our future. I definitely want to support and further standards, strong, stringent standards that allow us to compare how our kids are doing relative to kids around the country, in fact, around the world. I also want to make sure that we retain real autonomy over curriculum and those specific decisions. And so the obvious debate is how you do that, and that's what I'm looking very, very carefully at, and what I'm going to be focused on, including in these K through 12 discussions coming up in the leadership forum.
Senator, does that mean you haven't made a decision on whether or not you support Common Core?
That means I haven't finished doing my homework on that. I support the strong standards that Common Core represents. I'm looking at how we effectively retain our autonomy and aggressively make sure we develop curriculum and have those systems, school-based decisions be here in Louisiana and not be transported anywhere else. A key factor in all of that, in my mind, is looking at the PARCC test and any other tests that may develop, because I don't think the Common Core standards, even in and of themselves, mandate a federal law as curriculum. But I'm looking carefully at the PARCC test and any other tests as they develop to make sure that they don't as well, and that would be a significant issue that I'm already looking at and will continue to look at.
Would you have fought the levy board lawsuit, and where do you stand on that issue?
Again, issues that we're going to be talking about in my upcoming forums on Medicaid. As you noticed, one of those forums is specifically focused on improving our new public-private hospital partnerships. I support that basic model. I think it offers real opportunities to modernize and significantly improve our historic charity system. But it's a big change. It's a huge change, and any change that big, I don't think you can expect to get it exactly right in every detail the first time. So I think it's going to take several years of changing things, seeing how they develop, perfecting, if you will, that general model. And as you'll also notice in that leadership forum, the other thing mentioned in the title is reforming Medicaid. I think first and foremost, we need to reform and improve Medicaid. And we need to do everything necessary to do that, not just focus on whether we expand or don't expand a fundamentally broken system. Medicaid is a very mediocre system. By some measures, patients have better health outcomes with no insurance than versus on Medicaid. That's not by every measure, but it is by some significant measures. That's ridiculous. So we need to improve and reform Medicaid. And I want to look at everything that could be brought to bear to do that. Now, could more federal resources help to do that? They could if it's done right, and if it's done in a constructive way. And to me, that would require at least two things. First of all, making sure to stop this historic trend of having our state Medicaid match suck more and more and more and more of our state budget, because that is the biggest factor that's crushed higher education, for instance, over the last 30 years. And the second thing I would be particularly attuned to is to make sure we're not creating disincentives, perhaps additional disincentives to work, to get into the workforce, and to improve your life prospects in that way.
Senator, do you think time has come to make some real changes with the TOPS program as far as trying to reduce its costs?
We're going to be talking about that directly in a number of these forums, higher ed, as well as any discussion that involves state budget and spending and tax reform. I am concerned, like most people, about the escalating costs, because I think that continues without limit. It's going to be very difficult to impossible to afford. So yes, I'm looking carefully at that. I think the trick is to keep and promote what's been so enormously positive about TOPS, and not have runaway costs or spending that we simply can't keep up with over time.
Senator Michelle Milholland asked you in that last question that you got off on the Medicaid reform,
Yeah.
how you felt about the levy board lawsuit and whether you would support or oppose killing that suit. Can you give us your views on that?
I have serious concerns about that lawsuit, like a lot of people do. I mean, my biggest concern is basically the criteria for getting sued is if we're in the energy business in a certain geographic area. I think that's pretty worrisome or suspect, suing everyone in that business, irrespective of their actions, and that's basically what happened. Having said that, I have not carefully read the bill. I know there's a lot of discussion, debate about unintended consequences, other things. So I've not carefully read the bill, including with those possible unintended consequences in mind. So I'll certainly, have to do that carefully.
Senator, would you ask OPEC money to build round rail pipe speed?
Would I ask OPEC for money to do that?
Yes.
I would not go and beg for
It's not money, it's
anything to
investing.
OPEC countries.
Investing in Louisiana. Get the money that they have and invest it here.
Yeah, I would not go and beg OPEC countries for anything.
You-
I would
I'm
focus
not
on
asking you to beg, I'm
developing.
asking you, will you consider asking them to invest in Louisiana?
Yeah, I would not go and beg OPEC countries for anything. I would focus on the enormous energy opportunities for job creation, wealth creation, investment that we have here in America. We have unparalleled opportunities for that activity and a lot of positive consequences that can flow out of that here in the United States. So I'd focus on that. I'll obviously focus on Louisiana opportunity.
Senator,
Can
can
you-
you,
A few weeks ago, there was an article in the paper where you wrote a letter to the state DHH about some alleged HIPAA violations you were made aware of. And a medical friend of mine recently told me that he sent in some complaints like that to the Office of Civil Rights that says that they immediately send you a letter of response saying they got your complaint, and they'll send you another one saying when the investigation is complete. Do you, have you had any response at the state or federal level to your letter? And if you had a governor's administration here, how would you help someone like my friend who is having problems with any unresponsive federal agency?
Well, I've not gotten a substantive response yet to that letter, and I'm certainly going to follow up until I get one. I think any HIPAA violation, if it occurred, anything like that, any other violation of our health and safety code is serious. You know, whatever position I hold right now as senator, I do the same thing as governor, aggressively follow up to try to ensure that the law, whatever the law is followed by everyone.
Senator, you talked about being displeased with the current way that the budget has been balanced in recent years. What do you see doing differently? Do you think that, excuse me, that you need to cut additionally, or that there is some other way to get at revenue to smooth through?
Well, as I mentioned, look, I'm a long way from doing all my homework, including in that area. But I think we could have elements of tax reform that promote growth opportunities and that raise more revenue, not by jacking up rates, but by having a more pro-growth tax code that promotes economic growth more aggressively. So very broad brush, that would be my goal. For instance, again, give a broad brush example. You could take certain credits, deductions, exemptions that you don't think are particularly productive in terms of economic activity. You can turn that into lowering rates in certain areas or in all areas that might promote economic growth more aggressively. So, long way from finishing my homework, but that would be my general philosophy going in.
But does that approach involve, there's been an ongoing debate in the legislature about whether getting rid of tax exemptions equates to a tax increase and whether or not that's something that people are willing to look at. Are you willing to look at tax exemptions more broadly? And
I'm willing to look at everything. What I just described, however, traded tax exemptions for lower rates. But I'm willing to look at everything, and I don't think anything should be off the table.
Senator, there have been several groups, including Small Biz Republicans and the Institute for Justice, that have identified Louisiana as being one of the most oppressive states in terms of generating small business jobs through its excess number of what they deem as useless boards and commissions. If elected governor, how big of a priority, or would it be a priority at all of yours to abolish some of those boards and commissions, such as the Interior Design Board?
Well, I don't know any specifics about the Interior Design Board, but certainly I look at all of state government and look for efficiencies and look to lower troublesome, needless burden on business. So I'd certainly do that across the board. But let me reiterate, I think an equally or greater burden on business is our litigation environment. And that would be, as I mentioned earlier, that would be a real focus. There are many national metrics, many national groups that basically list us second to last in the country. I think that would be a major way we could improve our business environment. As I said a minute ago, I think we have the most pro-business environment in my lifetime. it's worlds ahead of where we were as I was growing up in Louisiana. But I think we can continue to improve, particularly in those two key areas I mentioned, maintaining a zero tolerance policy against corruption and cronyism, and looking at our litigation environment.
Thank you, Senator.
Follow up on that. In your last appearance here, you suggested that the root of the problem was less the specific things like legacy lawsuits than the issue of electing judges. Has your thinking changed on that?
Well, I don't remember saying exactly that, but certainly there are a host of improvements that I think could be made. Probably the single most difficult politically would be to change the system we choose judges. So that, I don't want to gild the lily, that would be a huge fight. I think we could do it in a productive way if we were able to accomplish it, but it would be a huge fight. But I'm looking at all sorts of changes. Many, I think, would be easier to build consensus around than that, a whole host of changes.
Senator, what type of chief executive would you be with regard to the pen and the phone? In other words, what would be your position on executive actions that would change or stop laws that you do not agree with?
Well, with regard to that, I wouldn't focus on the pen or the phone. I'd focus on the Constitution. I focus on the U.S. Constitution. I focus on the state Constitution. One of my biggest, most fundamental disagreements with President Obama is that he doesn't focus adequately on the Constitution. I think he's gone well beyond his constitutional authority in many, many cases. So in terms of being an executive, focusing on that, I wouldn't focus on the pen or the phone. I'd focus on the Constitution, including in this job, the state Constitution.
Senator Vitter, I want to first of all congratulate you on including dramatically improving K-12 education as one of your leadership forums. I'd like, though, to ask, how is it that we don't have pre-K, K through 12, especially with the dramatic research that is showing the economic benefit and return on investment in investing in pre-K. These are national studies, some longitudinal studies of over 30 years that are showing the economic return on investing in pre-K and therefore really giving children a strong start.
Sure. Well, I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree with you. I sent my kids to pre-K. We put K through 12 because that's obviously what's mandated under law. But I'm sure early education of all kinds, including pre-K opportunities and including those crucial early grades leading up to a level like the third grade and reading proficiency by the third grade that I alluded to, all of that's going to be discussed at both that forum and more generally as I do outreach around the state.
Would you see that as part of your work as governor of the state of Louisiana?
Sure. I mean,
more children in pre-K?
You know, in my discussions about education, pre-K comes up all the time, and we have pre-K opportunities, and there's discussion about how we possibly expand that. So kids go to pre-K now. You're right, many studies show they benefit from that on average significantly, so that's certainly going to be part of that discussion.
Less than 50% of pre-K eligible students in Louisiana actually attend. So I think that's important agenda.
Is there a bill that the governor has signed or vetoed that you would have approached differently this year?
You know, I'm sure there's not one. I'm sure there, I don't know, many. But I'll be honest with you, I'm focused on what I would do as governor, not what somebody else has done. I'm focused on preparing to be graded by the citizens of Louisiana, not grading anybody else.
You've been on the Armed Services Committee. What is the solution for the backward?
Well, the solution moving forward, I'm not sure. The solution in the last few years, I think, would have involved making decisions about support to the Iraqi government based on security concerns and needs, not based on American politics. And I think it was based and dominated by American politics versus security concerns. But look, that's behind us. Moving forward, that's a much, much tougher issue to figure out because things are going downhill so significantly and so fast. Certainly, we're discussing that in Congress, Armed Services Committee, classified briefings, et cetera. So certainly I'm focused on that and part of those discussions. But I'd be lying if I suggested there's any one key or vaguely simple answer.
They say it's always important to begin with the end in mind. What would be your desire for the people of Louisiana to have, looking back after you served for 8 years as governor, what would you want them to remember you accomplished and done for the state?
Well, that's a great thought, Woody, and a great perspective. I'd love for them to say we really attacked education improvement and made major headway. We really finished the job of making Louisiana a very welcoming place to grow jobs and business. And as a result, way more of our kids and grandkids are staying here. We have 4, our oldest, unbelievably, is going into senior year in college. So she's applying to med school. And I want, like every parent, I want them to stay here. And I want the future to be able to visit my grandkids here. And that's sort of the ultimate metric, if you will, that I'm going to be focused on.
We've got time for just a couple more questions.
The first polls for the governor's race show you and John Bell Edwards up at the top. In light of Eric Cantor's pollsters 30% blunder, how much can you trust the pollster?
Well, as an aside, I interviewed that pollster a couple of months ago. I did find it somewhat reassuring that after those 5 interviews, he was the first one I crossed off the list and making a decision for the future. But anyway, look, I'm not so worried about that because obviously in a campaign everybody uses polls, but I'm not focused on polls right now. They're going to go up and down. I'm focused on the key challenges we face as a state. I'm focused on doing the job right, communicating that directly and clearly to Louisianians. I think if I get that right, the politics will take care of itself, so I'm focused on that.
Senator, you recently enthusiastically endorsed Jeff Landry for Attorney General. How critical of a role do you think it will be for him to prevail to enhance a Vitter administration?
Well, first of all, let me back up because I think you misstated what I did.
Okay.
When Jeff was making public comments about entering that race, I said positive things about him,
okay,
which I believe and certainly stand tall would say again. I didn't formally endorse him. I'm going to be running my race for governor. I'm not going to endorse people in other races. I'm not going to have some ticket, which is an idea I've heard bandied around, which is the goofiest idea politically I've heard in a while. So I'm going to be focused on preparing for this job, and then next year I'm going to be focused on running my race on the ground. But I certainly, meant what I said in terms of those very positive things about Jeff, who I've known for a while.
Well, I'll stand corrected on that.
Senator, in Washington, you're coming from an environment that's very polarized by party, Democrats, Republicans. You're coming back to a legislature when the last time you were there, if you were elected, there wasn't that polarization. It may be about different issues. Do you anticipate having both Democrats in your administration as your floor leaders and everything, or are you going to do more of a party lineup?
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, I think the Louisiana tradition, which is far more bipartisan or nonpartisan in terms of administrations, in terms of makeup of committees, et cetera, is far healthier and far more productive than the Washington tradition. So I certainly wouldn't change that. And quite frankly, one of the things I look forward to is the opportunity to build that sort of broad-based team to get some important things done here in Louisiana, and you don't do that effectively on a purely partisan basis.
So there won't be a litmus test that says you have to be a certain kind of Republican to be in your administration?
there won't be a litmus test that says you have to be a Republican.
Are you endorsing in the Senate race this year?
Yes, I have said very clearly that I strongly support Bill Cassidy. I think he's a really smart, strong conservative, and I think we need a change from Mary to represent the values and traditions of Louisiana and the U.S. Senate.
The governor is not endorsed. Do you think he should?
Look, again, I control what I do and I focus on what I do. I'm not here to grade anybody else, to give anybody else advice. That's obviously up to him. But I think this is a crucial race for Louisiana, and I think it's a crucial race for the country.
How important is it to have Steve Scalise as the majority whip?
Well, I think that'd be super, and I support that, and I was actively making calls to several House members that I know well and support of Steve. So I think you'd do a great job first for the country. I think you'd do a great job, and it would obviously be a real benefit to Louisiana to have the third-ranking member of the U.S. House come from Louisiana. So I think it'd be super.
Senator,
thank you all very much.
Thank you.